Okay, now it's officially 12:15, and I would like to first introduce myself. My name is Dr. Chen Xijingyan. Chen is my last name, and I am an assistant teaching professor at the Interpreting and Translation Studies program at Wake Forest University. I'm also one of the co-chairs of the 9th APFTIS organizing committee. It's a great pleasure to welcome all of you to be here, all the presenters and all the audience to join our session today. I would like you to know that in addition to this live Zoom meeting, we also have live streaming on 3 different platforms. And also we are recording all the sessions so that after the forum, we plan to upload and share our session, interesting discussions, presentations with those who are interested. Okay, so our session is about multimodality, subtitling, which I think is a very important field and topic, especially now. So I may be biased because I find it personally interesting because I am interested. This is one of my research interests as well. But also I think this research in this field is timely and important. It touches upon a lot of important issues like including language transfer across cultural issues, accessibility, social justice, and so forth. And today in our session, we are very honored to have 3 speakers who are also translation practitioners, scholars, and educators to share their work and research with us. Although we only have 3 presentations today, they cover a wide range of interesting issues and topics, such as subtitling and dubbing in both professional and non-professional arenas in different language pairs. Such as English into Chinese, Japanese into English, and so forth. So without further ado, let me give the floor to our first speaker, Dr. Lu Sijing, sorry about that. And her topic is investigating the dynamics of commentary translation on Chinese video streaming site, a collaborative subtitling practice. And Dr. Lu is a visiting postdoctoral research fellow at University of Bristol. She holds a PhD in translation studies at University of Liverpool, UK, and a master's in audiovisual translation at University College London. Her research interests are audiovisual translation, intercultural communication, translation theories and methodologies, and Chinese media cultural studies. Her recent publications include the exploration of theoretical and methodological considerations of Chinese subtitling in journals such as Perspectives, Babel, and International Journal of Communication. She worked as a Chinese teacher at University of Liverpool and a freelance translator, subtitler for several English-Chinese video sharing sites and companies. So Dr. Lu, you are on.
All right, thank you very much for your introduction. And now I will share my screen. Yes, can you see my screen? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so good afternoon. My name is Sijing Lu, and today I'm going to share with you some of my recent research about the macro subtitling and commentary translation on a Chinese video streaming site. And here is an outline of my today's talk. So before going to the features and dynamics of commentary translation, so I would like to start my today's presentation by providing you some background information about video streaming sites in China and the latest modes of subtitling in the digital age. And then I will focus on a case study on Bilibili, which is one of the most popular video streaming sites in China, and discuss some subtitling norms and the role of commentary translation in facilitating a knowledge community. So let's get started. As a global phenomenon, the rise of streaming media has undermined previous linear patterns of media distribution and consumption. And especially during the lockdown and self-quarantine period of COVID-19 pandemic in the past 2 years. So online streaming sites have facilitated the access to essential resources for people to seek everyday news or public health information. So in this search, there are many creative means of knowledge or entertainment transfer produced by both professional and non-professional sectors. So they use digital platforms to communicate with a large and geographically distant population. And with a particular focus on China, the state plays a dominant role in supervising the entire media industry, and many international video streaming sites such as YouTube, Netflix, Apple TV are still not available in China's mainland. So this unique media landscape has enabled many domestic streaming websites to emerge and to gain a significant position in generating a specialized field of video streaming to Chinese people. And in terms of China's television industry, so it has changed dramatically during the past 20 years. For example, varying from cable TV to digital TV, from smart TV to streaming TV. So the rise of Chinese online streaming websites, as some scholars mentioned, is emergent, volatile, and heavily influenced by global actors. And from about 2005, online video streaming sites in China, modeled after YouTube, began to appear. For example, we have Youku, Kuliu, Wuliu, Bilibili, iQIYI, and so on. So there are so many different types of online streaming companies. So this proliferation of streaming companies contributes to providing some new genres of audiovisual materials, such as some user-generated videos, rather than the traditional officially sectioned TV. So today, take Bilibili as an example. This video streaming site was established in 2009, and it started its business by providing a large number of fan translation. For example, the fan translation of Japanese animation, comic, and games, which is called ACG content, are the foundation of this website. And then Bilibili extended to other audiovisual genres, such as films, TV series, documentaries, entertainment shows, and so on. And according to Bilibili's financial report in 2020, the average monthly users of Bilibili was over 200 million, and the average monthly number of video submission was nearly 6 million. So compared with those officially sectioned TV, why Bilibili can attract such large number of users, and why Bilibili is so successful in Chinese video streaming field. And there are two major reasons. The first reason is the platform's focus on fan translation content. So compared with the professional translation, fan translation is often regarded as more aesthetic, functional, and creative. Their language is much more colloquial and interesting than the neutral tone used in professional translation. And the second reason is the Bilibili's digital functions. So on this website, you can not only post a traditional comment in the comment zone, you can also send a danmaku, which is a newly emerged subtitling practice. So this is an example, a very typical example of what is a danmaku subtitling. So we can say the subtitles here on the screen are all called danmaku. Some people may say they're so interactive because this can block the whole screen. But when you watch the video on Bilibili, if you don't like this, you can turn the danmaku off through a button down below here. So danmaku, or 弹幕 in Chinese, refers to the light comments that run across the screen from right to left as the video plays. When an audience sends a danmaku, it will be directly inserted to screen, scroll across the video frame, and seen by others. And on Bilibili, audiences are given extensive agency to participate in the scene and interact with other audiences through this danmaku function. So rather than static comments in a traditional model, sending danmaku is an efficient way to give audiences a feeling of real-time interaction and co-viewing experience. So Bilibili uses this signature function to make the platform as a unique field of user participation based more than streaming itself. And some past studies have also been undertaken to examine the social implications of Bilibili, such as the use of the Denmaku function or the focus on user participation and also the proliferation of fan translation on the platform. So some scholars mentioned rather than demonstrating a top-down administration strategy in video streaming, the large number of user-generated videos on Bilibili has enabled this website to indicate a bottom-up strategy. So it contributes to change the hierarchies between the dominating sector and the dominated sector. And let's move to a more specific case study on this website. So today I'm going to focus on a fan translation channel called Yuzimu on Bilibili. So I will use Yuzimu channel as an example to explain some dynamic features of subtitling used in fan translation. Yuzimu channel is one of the largest fan translation channels on Bilibili, and it mainly focuses on translating some YouTube videos from English into Chinese. And here is a screenshot of the channel's homepage. And by the end of 2021, this channel has more than 360 million subscribers and over 10,000 uploaded videos. And the following result I present here today is based on my 10 months observation on this channel. So, for example, in terms of the subtitling interface on this channel, we can say from a screenshot here, the channel uses a bright blue and a special font for mid subtitles here, and the channel uses a bright yellow for the inserted explanations. So compared with the current official Chinese TV subtitle, which often feature on a stable white color and neutral pattern, Yuzimu subtitles are more creative and also have foregrounded fan translators' subjective stance. And here is another example of the translation in this channel. So in this example, we can say the subtitles are not positioned in a traditional way, which is often at the bottom of the screen. So in this example, we can say the two lines of blue subtitles and also with a shocked face emoji are displayed near the speaker's face. So this position has created a more comic and emotive effect that the speaker is speaking in a very surprised and angry way. So the subtitles used here are coherently integrated into the multimodal ensemble and also function as a textual insert, blending with the visual surroundings to enhance an emotional watching experience. And in this channel, I also found some fan translators. Sometimes they will upload some videos partially or fully untranslated in order to involve more audiences into the translation process. And audiences translation is often sent in comments. This includes both the comments in the traditional comment zone and also the comments sent through Denmaku. And here is an example of the commentary translation in the traditional comment zone. So we can say this commentary translation appeared down below an untranslated video posted on April 2021. We can say this audience left the original English dialogue here and also his translation in the comment zone, helping other audiences who don't have English capacities to comprehend the scene in the video. And here is another example here. So we can say this commentary translation is sent where Denmaku. This is the Denmaku translation, and here is my explanation and my back translation. So the audience is helping others to understand the plot in a real time. And it is also worth noting that most commentary translations sent by audiences are not traditional word-by-word translation. The translation is often more general and comprehensible, but they're still very useful in supporting other audiences to comprehend the key things, the key information in the video. And also, apart from sending the volunteer translation for the video, audiences were also motivated and engaged in expressing their opinions on the translation quality or to suggest any alternative translation choices for the video. So they are encouraged to send a macro or to leave any comments to point out any existing translation mistakes in the video. So here is a very typical and interesting example here. So this is a comment I found down below a video about pandemic. So in this comment, an audience left a comment. She said that English term pandemic is not correct in Chinese. It's not translated correctly in the Chinese. She suggested that pandemic should not be literally translated as 大流行 in Chinese, because original English pandemic refers to the spread of a disease, but the Chinese term 大流行 does not necessarily relate to a disease. So the audience then suggests a literary translation may lose something in target culture, and consequently, she proposed that 大流行病 was a better choice. So for those who can read Chinese here, so this is my back translation here, so you can know what the audience is trying to say in this comment. And also there are many other examples in this channel that the audiences to suggest their alternative translation choice. And also they point out any translation mistakes in the video. And due to the time limits today, I can't show this example one-to-one to you, but from all this example here, I would like to summarize, can we regard this phenomenon as a construction of a knowledge community? A community of knowledge, as Harry Jenkins knows, is centered around sharing knowledge and building intellectual interest. Participants collaborate to reproduce new knowledge, often in areas where traditional expertise does not suffice. So in terms of Bilibili, technology functions such as leaving comments in the traditional comment zone or sending the macro have supported in the emergence of cyberplays as a crucial side of participatory communication regarding translation. So in this cyberspace, audiences are provided with considerable agency in bringing together their knowledge and intelligence in translation. They participate in the process of producing translation, judging translation qualities, or suggesting any alternative translation solutions. So such practice not only contributes to drawing them into a sticky relationship with the channel, but also reaffirms the channel's social ties through constantly acquiring and reproducing knowledge. So to some extent, we can say by using the digital functions of the platform, the channel has not only constructed a platform for video streaming, but also constructed a knowledge community where like-minded people are participating in the process of translation production and translation evaluation. So to conclude my today's talk, through investigating some subtitling norms and the role of commentary translation in facilitating a knowledge community, so the current study can help us to examine some dynamic features of a fan translation channel on a Chinese video streaming site, Bilibili. And due to the proliferation of user-generated content today, and also the proliferation of video streaming sites, for future study, other fan translation channels on other video streaming sites can also be analyzed in order to extend the findings of my current study, and also to investigate whether the popularity of fan translation is leading us to a new streaming relationship between the center and the periphery sectors by breaking some official importation quota in the Chinese media sphere. And here are the references here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. This is apparently very, very interesting. Again, I'm maybe biased to me personally, but I guess for many audience as well. So I'm gonna open the floor for questions. You can either just unmute, raise hand, or type a question. So I will just read the first question from Bilibili, our live streaming platform for this forum as well. So an audience asked, what do you think about the question that whether the interaction between 弹幕 and uploader or YouTuber encourages the development of labor? Labor refers to a form of labor carried out in or around computer games.
Okay, so can you just repeat the?
Sure, I'm gonna copy paste the question here in the chat box so that everyone can see it.
Okay, cousin, what do you think about the question? What do you think? Still form of labor carried out in or around. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, this is a very interesting point. And actually, I used labor, this concept, in my PhD thesis. So labor literally refers to, yeah, just like the audience said, is a form of labor carried out in or around computer games. So in terms of subtitling communities, just like the subtitling communities I mentioned here in this presentation, I think many people now, they are trying to use subtitling production not only as a way to relax themselves, but sometimes they use this as a kind of like their daily work, their daily routine. So I remember during my PhD project, I interviewed some fan subtitlers. I interviewed them, I asked them why they want to do this work for free, why they want to do this work as volunteers, because producing subtitles are actually not an easy work. It's very time consuming. Sometimes producing like 1 minute's video can take you a whole day to do. So I asked them why they want to do this. And through the interview, some people told me because they think when they edit the subtitles, they think they can control the subtitles. They can use, for example, subtitling software as a way to relax themselves, as a way to control everything. They can decide the color, the font, or any other typographical features of the subtitles. So it's more like a way to control everything. So they can feel a sense of achievement in this process. Yeah, so they don't think this is a really like hardworking or this is really time-consuming work. Yeah, so I think this is a very important, very interesting, concept here.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. Any questions? Other questions from the audience or other speakers?
I have a question.
Yes, please, Carlo.
Hey, do you think that move will become more popular in the West over time, or do you think it'll be only an Eastern thing?
Actually, yeah, this is also a very interesting point. So actually, in some like Western video streaming sites, I think maybe sending demo is not quite popular as sending demo in China. And also I don't know why some people on the Bilibili, they like sending demo very much than other video streaming sites. I think it really depends on the digital functions of the platform. If the platform wants more audiences to participate in the process, I think they will try to make some digital like affordance easy for people to send demo. But also for some platform, if they don't want more audiences to be involved in like sociality or some other activities, I think they maybe don't want people to get involved in sending demo. Yeah, so I think it really depends on the digital affordance of the platform.
Thank you. And I just saw another question coming from the audience. So Boshua Kala asked, are you aware of any research connecting the positionality of subtitles to eye tracking research, probably linking it to preferences or cognitive aspects of translation?
Yeah, eye tracking research in terms of subtitling is also a very interesting and also a very popular research area currently. But for me, I only focus on like the participate observation and also participation in the community to collect some data. So, but some of my colleagues now at the University of Bristol say they use some technologies to do some eye tracking research. Yeah, so I think eye tracking research is also a very interesting point. Yeah, to analyze this demo, to analyze people's like their reception of Denmark subtitling. Yeah, but personally, I do for myself, I don't do this eye tracking research.
Thank you, Dr. Lu. Thank you so much. And thank you for the very interesting and inspiring questions. And now we are going to move on with our second speaker, actually the two speakers for this very interesting research. This is from Professor Vance Scheffer and Tamara Warhol, and their research is about linguistic and communicative competence in subtitling and dubbing codes and styles to express diverse and evolving identities, relationships, and stances in Japanese entertainment media. And Professor Scheffer and Warhol, they're both associate professors of applied linguistics and TESOL in the Department of Modern Languages at the University of Mississippi. Without further ado, I will give the floor to Professor Scheffer and Professor Warhol.
Very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much, Dr. Chen. We're very happy to be here. So as Dr. Chen said, we are going to be talking about the linguistic and communicative competence in subtitling and dubbing codes and styles to express diverse and evolving identities, relationships, and stances in Japanese entertainment media. Quite a bit there. Our agenda is that we'll first talk about the common styles and codes in Japanese and their associations, their social associations, and then in comparison of the original Japanese dialogues with the subtitled and dubbed translations and future directions. And so we have now the next section.
Hi, so I want to start with the notion of language ideologies, which are our beliefs and feelings about language structure and use. And these are often, and variation is one way of indexing or pointing towards language ideologies. So if we have someone who says ain't in English, for example, it often points to someone who is less educated. Similarly, in Japanese, we'll see variation as being indexical of these language ideologies. Unfortunately, in translation, often these ideologies or identities are erased because we don't have literal translation to one. So we have to manipulate codes and styles in order for it to be more important. So Vance, could you move? In Japanese, we have different variation. We have standard Japanese, regional dialects, and sociolects, which are things like honorific languages, registers, the way different genders speak. And people, when they're speaking, don't stick to one variation, rather they style shift, they move between regional variation and standard Japanese and their sociolects. And so we have people who understand it because it's active and receptive codes, but at the same time, you need to be able to read the air. I don't know how to say it in Japanese, unfortunately. And so we see registers here. An example from honorific language would be the highest or most polite down to coarse language. Additionally, we think about beautified speech, which is what women, idealized women would speak. And we have examples of eat and make. We also have differences in pronouns, where first person I has family name and often has second person with different san or sama. And we move through the different registers of pronouns as well. These are not necessarily polite to coarse, but they're similarly polite to coarse depending on how we go. And we also have regional dialects, which we'll be talking about today. There's the Tokyo, which is often considered the standard dialect, and then the West with Kyoto and Osaka. And we'll see differences in copula, or the to be verb, verb forms, sentence final particles, pitch, and lexicon. And finally, we're going to look at we don't use the FAR model, but it helps us think about translation, and we want to think about functional equivalence. So do subtitles convey speaker's meaning? So this is, unfortunately, there's linguistic constraints with communicative competence. Acceptability, do the subtitles sound correct and natural in the target language? So we think about foreignization and domestication of translation. And readability, so can we read the subtitles fluently? And here we have translation constraints, the length of the subtitles, dubbing with lip syncing, etc.
Okay, and so now we move on to our study. We looked at 3 shows, or we're still doing this. The first show is Rurouni Kenshin, The Beginning. It's a movie on Netflix right now, and it's about he's an assassin. He's caught up in a struggle between the pro and the anti-governments in the 1860s before modern Japan. Another show we looked at is What Did You Eat Yesterday, for all you foodies out there. This depicts the daily life of a middle-aged gay couple, a hairdresser, lawyer, as they enjoy eating food. And the last one is a science fiction show, The Door into Summer, and it's about an inventor who creates robotic technology, but then his business partner, girlfriend, they take everything and they put him into sleep, and he arrives in the future and he wants to get back to the past, and he has to work with an android to go back in the past. The methods that we use, that we look at the original Japanese dialogues, we look at the translated subtitles, and then sometimes the translated dubbed dialogues. And then we look at certain features like lexicon, grammar, and pronunciation that Tamara just pointed out. And so these are our comparisons. We start first with the samurai show. As mentioned, there are regional dialects. We're looking at the copula, the verb, the be form. In Japanese, you have da, ja, and ya. These are casual forms again. The da is indexing Tokyo in the show, in the sense the pro-government people. The ja in red, as you can see, is indexing the anti-government people. And then ya indexes some anti-government people, but mostly it's because the show takes place in Kyoto. And so you see ya there. And so in one scene, you have the pro-government samurai, they're walking down a street and they see the protagonist far away and like, who's there? State your name, hey. And when they do that, they speak in very, very standard, again, casual Tokyo style Japanese. And you can see it on the left-hand side. And they have da, da, da. Again, you can see used. And in the English part, you notice that it's pretty standard as well. Probably in this case, General American. And so in this case, it seems to be okay because you have a standard with a standard. But again, it indexes the people who are supporting the government. In opposition to that, there's a meeting from the anti-government people, and they're arguing and talking over each other. It's not very, very clear. But again, if you look at the original on the left-hand side, you can see here, they start to use the ja, and again, ja, and then so ja on this side. The translations are not so clear again because they are arguing over each other. So the dub dialogue is not that audible. The subtitles are there, but the subtitles, their translations pretty much look like standard GA like we saw in the previous slide. And then furthermore, another person comes and he's like nanja, and ja, again, he's using that, and he's using other features of the regional dialects. And then he suddenly switches into very formal standard Japanese when he says to the leader, it literally means I've kept you waiting, but he's saying he's here because he's brought the protagonist to the group to talk to them. There's another scene, they're in a tavern, and in this case, the Kyoto dialect basically is serving as like creating the atmosphere. And so the customers and the tavern owner are speaking in Kyoto dialect or Osaka or Kansai dialect, and it's very clear to most Japanese when they hear these ya and ya and ya. And then there's some other words in bold that are also of this dialect. But if you look at the translations here, again, we're seeing, at least in the subtitles, that it's very standard-like. But if you go over to the dubbed ones, you will see there's this hint of perhaps dialect when you have ye ain't kidding with the ain't. You might interpret miss and ma'am or the pronunciation, what can I get you, a little bit more as dialectal. So there seems to be an attempt to convey a difference between people. And then there are two government supporters who are drunk and harassing people who are getting in a fight with the protagonist. And you can see in this side, you have da here that they use to index and that they are pro-government. And then while they're fighting outside, sorry to give the story away, another person comes along and he's like, oh, he's there to kill the protagonist, who's also called Batosai. And he's like, he uses da there. And so from us, we're like, oh, that form tells you that he's pro-government and the government probably sent him to kill the protagonist. And finally, in addition to the copula and all the other forms, there's pronunciation going on. And there's a scene, and it's a flashback where the protagonist has showed up for training. And a person comes up to him and he trills his R's. So you have like here all these R's that I wrote, and it's like marre, like that. And he trills his R, which for Japanese speakers is a sign of aggression in terms of a stance. It could be also your identity as being a ruffian or a rough person. He has other features where he elongates sounds. He speaks in a very low voice. And again, this is what we call like the badass samurai or the yakuza. But when you look at the subtitles, and we also checked out German, there's not much of that going on. And a lot of it has to be based on the voice. The German had a low voice, the English not so much. But he does say, what'd you say, which you could look at, but perhaps it's not so much there. In the next show, What You Eat Yesterday, the cooking show, we look at the relationship between the couple. And you have the lawyer, Shiro, and you have Kenji, who is the hairdresser. And Shiro is very hyper masculine in the way he speaks. And so he uses the omae, which is a very coarse male way of speaking to someone. It can be his identity, but it could be the stance in the sense that in here, he's very angry. In the translation, they have damn, which kind of fits with the verb or that situation, which is quite nice. Shiro also uses words like ku, which is a very coarse way of saying eat. He uses umai, which is not as coarse, but it stands in juxtaposition to Kenji, who says oishi, which is the same meaning of these words. Kenji also calls his partner Shiro-san the whole time. And he has things that are slightly effeminate, like nano as in endings. And so we see this relationship, and it looks like it reflects the heteronormative standards of maybe a wife and husband stereotype, of course, and hypermasculinity here. In the next scene, another scene, there's Shiro talking to his mother. And the way his mother talks is also somewhat hyper female or hyper mother, if you will, as well, because she uses any like wayo or noyo. She even says things like iinasai, which is very much something a mother would say to a child or a teacher to a young student, for example. Shiro, on the other hand, doesn't speak that way. He speaks very casual, but not very coarse. There are two cases where his mother is going, you need to be out and proud. You need to tell everyone that you're gay at your company. He's like, he uses the form, the mas form here, which is a polite form. And he's saying, I'm not, I haven't done that. I haven't told them. Or later he says, I understand, because he's getting exasperated with her. And so in a sense, this is showing his stance of being exasperated with his mother. And then finally, another thing on the show is there are a lot of gay terminology here. There are three things to point out. For example, in English, on the right-hand side, you see the word bear, which is a large, hairy man, in this case, in the gay community. And Japanese pretty much has that where they have that term like bearded bear. Another term that we want to look at is a term for gay. Japanese has the word gay, same pronunciation, basically. But they also have the more clinical word that equates to homosexual, which the mother uses, but the translation uses gay here, which is a little bit different, perhaps. And the third thing is the relationship. Kenji tells a female customer when he cuts hair that he goes, I'm the man in the relationship. Well, later his partner finds out he says that, and he's very upset. And he talks about, well, I may be the bottom. And so in gay lingo, in the gay community, bottom is more submissive type, to put it, of course, simply. But that has been translated from Japanese, and it seems to be quite one-to-one there. But there's another term here that's not been translated, which is a submissive guy who's very masculine in the way he acts. And that's kind of missing here. But overall, I think what's interesting here is the fact that these gay terms are being mainstreamed into a society that is the non-gay community. And finally, the last show that we're going to look at, The Door into Summer, the protagonist, the main character, wakes up, Takakura, he wakes up and there's an android there. And he talks to the android very in casual language, sometimes a little coarse. But in opposition to that, the android speaks very much customer service language. He's very, very polite. As you can see, the words are longer and bolded here. They're shorter in Japanese. for example. But there's some hint of that in the translation where the android says acknowledge, which sounds more computer-like than it sounds like service-oriented. But the android becomes a little exasperated again with Takakura because he's trying to get out of the hospital, and he switches styles and he says, what a pain. And in Japanese, you have the same thing, but you also have this pronunciation there. Instead of mendokusai, you have mendokuse, which is a very casual Tokyo male kind of form that you might hear. We looked at the Chinese out of curiosity as well here. And again, it seems to just look like what the English has, but it doesn't have so much of this polite language going on of hierarchy. What's also interesting to note here, lastly, is that the relationship evolves, and eventually the Takakura starts referring to the robot as Pete, his name, or Kimi, which is not as coarse a word for you. And then their relationship, again, there's this hierarchy going, and they use this for comedy, like you might see with Dr. Spock in Star Trek or something. And there's a scene where the android is very polite, says, "One moment, sir," and uses sama, which is a polite, very polite form of san. And Takakura is like, "Please stop that. Don't call me that. Don't call me sir." And so he takes off sama and just calls him Takakura, which like in English would be like saying, "Hey, Jones," something that male athletes or soldiers might do to one another. But in English, it's been translated as dude, which is a nice translation, but it also evokes the idea of a young male white speech as opposed to anything, where the Japanese doesn't have that. And so this ends. Our preliminary observations suggest that there's a tendency to translate into standard middle-class English, in this case, American, general American. Identities, regional, social, gender, and relationships seem to be erased in the translated subtitles. Styles, and therefore style shifting, and therefore stances are also erased. Accent or sound may go unnoticed. The result, we feel, is kind of the characters seem less colorful. The interactions and relationships a little flatter. And so sometimes it's difficult to follow dialects and storylines in the translations. And the result may be that viewers think, well, Japan is a very monolithic society because you're not seeing all this variation going on. And there's also the idea that the translations are using standard language, which supports or promotes standard language ideology. And we're also seeing that there seem to be more linguistic constraints than translation constraints, as subtitles or dubbing. And the last slide, this is it. We're still working on this. Our future direction is that we want to test L1 speakers. So that is, how do native Japanese view and understand the original? How do native speakers of English or Chinese or German do the translations, their attitudes towards subtitles and dubbing? And then this is what we're working on. And then for the future, looking at the subtitles and how they could be used in a different way, adding comments or text to help the international audience to understand. And so we're about doing think about protocols as well, and analysis of phonology and pivot language to see what that might be doing to this. And so this is the end. We thank you very much. We might have a chapter coming out, so please look at that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us. And thank you again.
Great, thank you so much, Vance and Tamara. I was actually going to ask you about, have you considered about the reception study or like comparative study, but apparently you are already on that. Thank you, professors. Now we're gonna see if we have any questions from the audience or other speakers. Okay, so you can type your questions in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself. While we wait for some questions coming up, I actually had another quick question for Vance and Tamara. I wonder, what were your standards, when you chose those three programs, those movies? I know they're all on Netflix, so basically you focus on professional subtitling in that regard. And I also wonder, was those like very representative works that you've in the end you find I'm very also happy to see the preliminary results that you shared, that some of the identities characters were erased from those movies or like programs that you chose. So I wonder about how did you select those?
I think, to be honest, this quite random. I mean, I do watch Netflix, I do things out of my life, and I was watching some of the shows. And I was noting, just listening to the Japanese, and then I would turn the subtitles on and I was noting the differences. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. To be fair, these are all very recent shows. They're not obviously all the shows on Netflix. And so it kind of was haphazard. But I think if you watch I think it's just it marks Japanese society. To speak Japanese, you have to, every utterance has to be marked by what level of language you choose. And so I think any show would show that. But if you have any advice about we should be careful about what we choose or what we look at, please let us know. I guess, does that help to answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I feel the same way that, usually I also did some study on Bilibili, like Dr. Liu just shared her work. So I pretty much did the same thing, that in my casual time, I watched some shows and found out some interesting fact, that connects back to the research, and kind of like a common trend as well. But yeah. Thank you so much for sharing. And we have a question from Suwen. She asked, how do you think multimodality, for instance, color, size, or the figure behavior of the characters and so on, may play a role in compensating for the loss of the representational meaning of the original film?
Oh, that's a nice question. I guess I'll go ahead if Tamara doesn't mind.
I mean, if you want to, I can do it as well.
Oh, well, I'll let you go first and I may add comments.
Sure. I think that on the one hand, it can help because you could bold certain things to make them more relevant or add color. On the other hand, you would have to have semiotic associations between those colors and English, right? So if we bolded something, it would not necessarily have the same semiotic association in English that it might have in a different language or between even English speakers. I don't know what you think, Vance.
Yes, I mean, that's Dr. Warhol's or Tamara's area of specialty, not mine. And so, yes, I was going to add perhaps that for those of you who are familiar with TV in Asia, for example, whether Taiwan, mainland China, Japan, Korea, the usage of the screen is very different. It can be cluttered with things, but if there is a potential that maybe we should have a paradigm shift, that younger generations here in the States, for example, maybe like, we don't need just the standard little subtitle. You can add a little more here and there because people are used to that kind of screen nowadays. So there's that potential to perhaps do that somehow. I don't know how exactly, so I have to look out and see what the younger generation is consuming.
This actually goes back to the question from, Carlo asked for the first presenter about, how the Damaku feature can be popular in Western countries versus Eastern countries. I actually heard a theory about a concept called entropy. I don't know if you heard of it before, that talks about the density of characters, character-based languages such as Asian languages, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean, so forth. They have much more density than English and Spanish, for example. In that case, for example, we put one character on the screen and it shows so much information, and that's part of the reason for Damaku and other features to work. Actually, I thought it was interesting, but I'm so bad at math and others, so I'm afraid I cannot test it out. But I thought something interesting to see, and also like Vance mentioned, it'd be interesting to see whether the younger generation here in the States would actually accept that. Now they're probably the reading speed from that generation, is much faster, I believe, than the TV generations, I guess.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you so much for the very inspiring questions. Thank you, Professor Warhol and Professor Schaffer. Now it's our last speaker of this session from Ms. Lu Siwen, and her topic is about, we're going to look at humor in subtitling. So she will be talking about how humor in multimodality constructed in film, the case of the Chinese subtitling of humor. And Ms. Siwen Lu is a final year PhD candidate at University of Liverpool. Her research interests include audiovisual translation, multimodality, digital media cultures. She also has published several articles in peer-reviewed journals, including Perspectives, Babel, Translation Horizons, and International Journal of Communication.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. So can you all see my screen? Okay, so hello everyone. My topic here today is about subtitling of humor from a multimodal perspective. So this is the outline of my talk today. So first, I will talk about my research questions, and then I will give you a brief introduction to humor, including the mechanism of humor and also the functions of humor in film and the classification of humor. And then I will briefly talk about the data that I use in my research. So in my research, I chose the Shrek film series. And then I will present the results of the data analysis, including the translation strategies used to subtitle humor, as well as the intermodal relations between different elements in modes when constructing the humor. Okay, so let's get started. So here are my research questions. So the first question is about the functions of humor in the original films and how are these functions constructed multimodally. The second question is about the translation strategies used to subtitle humor. And also I aim to identify are there any patterns or regularities in terms of the Chinese subtitling of humor. The last question is from a multimodal perspective. So it investigates the intermodal relations between different elements in modes when constructing the humor, and also do the intermodal relations in the source text retain or change in the subtitle films when different translation strategies are employed, and also what is the impact of this on the meaning making in the subtitle film. So first, I will briefly talk about humor, how humor is achieved. There are two key parameters of humor, incongruity and superiority. So incongruity can be defined as a contrast or a conflict between what is expected and what actually happens. Superiority can be defined as a sense of reinforcement or an increasement of self-esteem as a result of solving a joke or a humor. So these two parameters of humor are strongly interrelated, as the incongruity represents the cognitive aspect of humor, and the superiority tends to be more visible because it emphasizes the social function of humor. So now let's look at the functions of humor in film. So I classify the functions of humor in film mainly into two categories, the narrative function and the interactive function. So the narrative function can also be called a plot carrying function, as humor can indicate the development of plot and enrich characters and activities. So for example, in the Shrek film series, the frequent use of humor and the wordplay and ironic remarks in Donkey's speech can indicate his hyperactive, funny, and talkative personality. And sometimes the use of humor can also reflect the character's social class and background. And humor can also have some interactive function, for example, to indicate a certain relationship between characters on screen. And also, for example, in the Shrek film series, the frequent use of humorous speech between Donkey and Shrek can indicate a close relationship between the two characters. And humor can also contribute to constructing the relationship between the viewers and the film. For example, being able to resolve a humor which contains a cultural reference can indicate a sense of in-group identity among the audience. However, this in-group feeling may not be reproduced in the subtitle films because the target audience may not share the same cultural background as the source audience. So now let's look at the classification of multimodal humor in film. So based on previous studies, in my research, I classify the multimodal humor into mainly three categories: universal, language-based, and a culturally specific multimodal humor. So I will give you examples of each type of this humor, okay? So universal multimodal humor mainly refers to the types of humor in which the language and cultural differences are greatly reduced. So the comic effect is not dependent on either culturally specific references or language-specific wordplay. So here is an example from the film Johnny English. So in this example, the humor or the incongruity is achieved between the dialogue you have entered the most secure location and the image shown on screen. As we can see, there is an explosion at the background. So because this instance does not involve any cultural reference or language-specific wordplay, so it is an example of universal multimodal humor. And for language-based multimodal humor refers to the instances which are based on a language-specific wordplay, such as puns created through polysemy, homophony, and synonymy. So here is an example from the film Toy Story. In this example, the character Sheriff Woody, he asked Buzz, who is out of screen, for help, saying, "Will you get up here and give me a hand?" So the Woody's utterance is followed by Buzz's action as he throws one of his hands towards Woody. So the humor in this example is achieved through the incongruity between the idiomatic meaning of "give me a hand" and the visual representation of the literal meaning of this phrase. So as you can see, the humor is not realized through the dialogue or the image alone, but through the combination of these two modes, through the image and dialogue together. And lastly, culturally specific multimodal humor refers to the types of humor which are strongly rooted in a specific culture. Here is an example from the film Ice Age. So this example contains a culture reference, Stonehenge. So the humor is achieved through the dialogue, modern architecture, and the image, as we can see here, which is a prehistoric monument, Stonehenge. So the successful reception of this type of humor depends heavily on the target audience, their recognition of this cultural reference. Okay. So in my research, I used the Shrek film series as an example to do a close study. So as you can see here, the Shrek film series contains 4 films. And here are the number of multimodal humor that I have identified in each film. So this figure shows the distribution of each type of multimodal humor in the Shrek film series. So as you can see here, universal multimodal humor is the predominant type of humor in the Shrek film series, accounting for nearly 70%, followed by culturally specific multimodal humor and language-based multimodal humor. There are also 3 instances of humor which have both the culture-specific references and language-based references. And so how are these humor translated in the subtitle films? What translation strategies used to subtitle this humor? So as you can see from this table, literal translation is the most common translation strategy to subtitle multimodal humor, followed by formation, accounting for nearly 15%. And all of the other translation techniques only account for a very small number. For example, explicitation, paraphrase, substitution, reduction, creation, generalization, transliteration, and also a combination of translation strategies. Okay. So next, I will briefly talk about the multimodal analytical framework that I use to analyze the multimodal humor. So the analytical framework is based on the systemic functional linguistics informed multimodality. It mainly involves 3 levels of analysis. Representational level mainly concerns the description of identification, activity, and circumstances. The interactive level mainly concerns the relationship between different participants, for example, between the characters on screen and between the film and the viewer. And lastly, the compositional level mainly concerns the intermodal relations from a semantic perspective. So in my research, I have identified 4 types of intermodal relations: complementary, reinforced, parallel, and contradictory. I will introduce these 4 types of intermodal relations in the next slide. So based on previous study, in my research, I mainly consider 3 main modes: the spoken mode, the mise-en-scene mode, and the subtitle mode. And each mode also contains different elements. For example, the spoken mode contains the semantic level and the tone, which play an important role in constructing humor. The mise-en-scene mode contains the setting, such as the props, figure behavior, for example, the expression and movement of the figures, costume and makeup. The subtitle mode is only considered in the subtitle films. So in the next 2, so I will first talk about the definition of the 4 types of intermodal relations identified in my research. So complementary relation refers to the types of intermodal relations in which the meanings expressed by one or more elements in modes provide additional information to the other element. So which means the audiences, they need to refer to all of the elements to get a full understanding of the multimodal text. The reinforced relation refers to the types of relation in which the meanings expressed by the elements in modes are thematically equivalent, and repeating information is conveyed through different elements in modes. So for example, the two modes, they convey more or less the same information. The contradictory relation refers to a type of relation in which the meanings expressed by one element are considered to express opposite or thematically incompatible information. So for example, one element tells one thing while the other element tells the contrast. And then lastly, the parallel relation. So the elements in modes do not combine to form a specific meaning, but rather the information they provide is considered independent from one another. So in the next two slides, I will show you two examples from the Shrek film series, so you can get a better understanding of this. So here is an example of universal multimodal humor. So as you can see in this example, the humor is achieved through the dialogue, salting the meal and watering the plants, and the setting, as we can see here, and salted meal and dead flowers, okay? So literal translation is used in this example. So in both the original and the subtitle film, the humor is achieved through the contradictory relation between the setting and the thematic, because the setting tells one thing, while the dialogue tells the opposite. So it is through the contradictory intermodal relation that the humor is achieved in this example. And due to the use of literal translation, this humor is retained in the Chinese subtitle films. And here is an example of language-based multimodal humor. So as you can see here, the incongruity or the humor is achieved through language creativity or wordplay. So here is the source dialogue. Man, you are a catastrophe, and you are ridiculous. So the two English words are created through the combination of a cat and a catastrophe, and the donkey and ridiculous. So the words cat and donkey can also be seen on screen, but are also consistent with the animals on screen. So in the Chinese subtitles, instead of creating new words, these two English compound words are replaced by two Chinese idioms, 阿猫阿狗 and 驴唇不对马嘴, so which fit naturally into the context. And also the character in the two Chinese idioms also fit into the animals shown on screen. So although the creation of the word is not reproduced in the Chinese subtitles, the replacement of the original words with two Chinese idioms can retain part of the original comic effect, because the Chinese subtitles fit naturally in the context as well as fit into the image shown on screen. So in both the original and subtitle film, the humor is achieved through the complementary relation between different elements in modes. For example, the teasing tone of the character, the setting, and the figure behavior. They combine, they provide additional information to one another. So to conclude, in my research, I found that literal translation is the most common translation strategy used to subtitle multimodal humor, followed by omission. And to be specific, nearly 90% of the universal multimodal humor have retained in the Chinese subtitle films, while for culturally specific and language-based multimodal humor, only 20% and 45% of the regional have not suffered partial or total loss, respectively. And also, I have identified different types of intermodal relations in the construction of humor. And also, under the employment of different translation strategies, the intermodal relations participating in construction, the humorous meaning, mostly retain in the subtitle films. So to summarize, my study highlights the fact that multimodal humor are constructed through the intermodal relations between different elements in modes. And therefore, I argue that when analyze subtitle translation, they should also consider the accompanying elements in modes, because subtitles often interact and also rely on these elements to make meanings. And this is the reference list of my talk. And thanks very much. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Suan. I want to share some questions we received from bilibili.com.
Okay.
I just copy paste that to the chat box, and the questions were translated by our ITS student Vivian Chen Yu, who's also in the meeting. So I just want to thank her for translating all the questions. So the questions are: is the corresponding of dialogue and image different from that of dialogue and event? Is the humor conveyed by the image or by the event or action? Is it worth researching that distinguish the image and event in the film?
Is the corresponding dialogue different from that of dialogue in event? Is the humor conveyed by the action? Okay, yeah, I think I don't know if I understand the question correctly, but I think during the subtitle process, the subtitler, they cannot change the image. So in most of the time, they cannot change the image. So the actions, the events are there, they cannot change. So they can only they can only transfer the dialogue, for example, from English into Chinese. So this is why the translation of multimodal humor is one of the biggest challenges for subtitlers, because for translating multimodal humor, you need to find a solution that not only convey the original thematic meaning, but also need to fit into the image shown on screen. So, but part of translator, their leeway is constrained by the image because they cannot change the image. So they need to they need to use their imagination and the creativity to come up with the solution that can best retain the original humorous meaning. But in most of the time, due to the linguistic differences between English into Chinese, they cannot find equivalent that not only fit into the original context, but also fit into the image. So in this situation, the translators, I think they need to come up with a solution, whether they want to use literal translation in order not to clash with the image, or do they want to replace the original humor with, for example, the Chinese idioms, as I talked about just now. So it really depends on translator, their decision. I think I don't know if I have answered this question correctly.
Yeah, thank you, Suan. I actually had two quick questions about the methodology and the methodology part. So if I'm not mistaken, the strategies you adopted here are from DS Syntax, right? I wonder regarding the translation strategies. I wonder, have you considered other taxonomies? To here.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the question. So the translation strategies I have identified here are based on not only the syntax classification, but also based on other scholars, especially scholars doing the subtitling research from English into Chinese, because the identification of translation strategies is also depend on the language pairs you are researching on. So yes, this classification of translation strategies, I think, is specific to the subtitling of humor. It may not apply to analyze other translation issues. For example, I also did research in the subtitling of swear words. So when I did research in the subtitling of swear words, the identification of translation strategy is quite different from the subtitling of humor. So I think it really depends on the translation issue you are looking at.
I definitely agree. Yeah,
and also the language pairs.
Yes, I definitely agree. Yeah, because I've been doing also a research on taboo words, offensive words, swear words. So like you said, the widespread or the well-accepted ones were like in European or Anglophone academia, and sometimes we can just not directly use them in Chinese English context. Yes, and we see another question coming up. Due to time limit, this will be our last question or questions. So fantastic, fascinating topic, methodology and analysis. I've always thought of humor as untranslatable. If you can you cite some examples of creativity or adaptation to achieve humor in translation? I also wonder, how have you found the Chinese translation for you as a bilingual? Was it as humorous as the source when translated literally? Great questions.
Yeah, great question. Very interesting. Yes, some people may argue that humor is untranslatable, But I think based on my experience and also based on my research, I found that most of the humor, sometimes maybe in animations, because there are a lot of different types of humor, most of the humor are retained in the subtitle films. So for example, in this research, as you can see, most of the humor, they are universal multimodal humor. So for this type of humor, nearly 90% of the original are retained in the Chinese subtitle films. And literal translation is the most common translation strategy to subtitle this type of humor. But for culturally specific and also language-based humor, although they only account for a very small number of the total, but they prove to be the most challenging type of multimodal humor. So in my research, I found that most culturally specific multimodal humor are deleted in the Chinese subtitle films. So in this way, the target audience, they may not get the original comic effect. And also as for the creativity or adaptation to achieve humor in translation, I think my example here is a good example. So it also requires the translator's creativity. As you can see, instead of creating two new words, the subtitler, they replaced the original English compound words with two Chinese idioms. So although the language creativity is not reproduced in the Chinese subtitles, but the use of the two Chinese idioms also contain part of the original humor. So I think in this case, the target audience, as a Chinese audience, I think we can still enjoy the part of the original humorous meaning. Yes.
Thank you so much, Sivan, and thank you again for all the 3 wonderful presentations that we have today in our session. I believe I personally learned so much, I was so inspired, and I think, yeah, so this marks the end of today's session number 7. And next, I want to let you know that there is a parallel session still going on, that we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of our ITS program at Wake Forest. So, and then after that, right after that, our director, Dr. Furmanek, will conduct a closing remark of the 9th APFTIS, starting at right after the last session. So yeah, so if and also I will be announcing the results of the 2 awards, Rising Scholar and Best Student Paper Award during the closing remarks. So thank you again so much for attending the session. I hope I will see you around, in person or elsewhere in the conferences. Thank you so much.